This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham and Jeff Fife. We're going to talk, well, we know, a good bit of UVA hoops, maybe some other stuff. Jeff, welcome.
Wahoo-wah. It's a beautiful thing, Chris. And the Ted Williams jersey is up here in the podcast studio. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And he's actually blocking a little DiMaggio, so that's good. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, you know, I've got the homage to sports as much as possible here. I'm an old-time baseball fan, you know, baseball history guy. I got a Jackie Robinson jersey. That was my first old-time jersey, and then a mantle and DiMaggio. My grandfather didn't admit to being a Yankees fan, but he always talked about the Yankees, especially, and I'll say this, kind of one of the family things. When he started deteriorating with dementia, he would tell stories, and so when I would visit, I would just kind of listen and act like I was there, and he would tell me about piling the kids in the car and taking them to see because he lived near Philadelphia for 20 years or so, and he would talk about piling the kids in the car to go see the Philadelphia A's play the Yankees, and he would talk about what a great player DiMaggio was, what a great player Mantle was, and I think even though he lived in Philadelphia or near Philadelphia, he didn't talk about the Philadelphia A's players. He talked about the Yankees players, so those are sort of my throwbacks to my grandfather. And then Ted Williams is the best hitter of all time, so you can't go wrong with the splendid splinter. Yeah, and
it makes a good curtain, you know, to cover up the any ambient light coming in from the window. If y'all ever curious about the brainchild of Chris Graham, the studio has changed to different locations throughout the course of his house, but it's always a fun little area. Now you also have posted all of your media passes.
I was going to say, yeah.
How many decades? Is that a decade's worth of media passes?
That's probably a decade worth, yeah, dating back, you know, when with Augusta Free Press, I want to say it was around 2005. We talked about this on a recent podcast. It was around 2005 we started covering UVA sports through Augusta Free Press. And then, yeah, there are NASCAR pit passes up here. There are wrestling, covering wrestling event passes. And, of course, ACC tournaments, super regionals in baseball. There's ACC.
Probably some Barclays in there.
Barclays.
New York.
Sweet 16 in Madison Square Garden. Yeah, Raleigh, first rounds in Raleigh and Charlotte. So, yeah, and then, of course, a lot of football. Military Bowl, I'm sure, is up here, too, the most recent. So, yeah, there's a little bit of everything. I'm trying to think. Richmond Squirrels baseball. I've done some Richmond Squirrels baseball in the past year, so yeah.
Well, it was entertaining because in 2013 I had my first real-world experience in the ACC tournament and went down and covered it for 4 days. We totaled my car. But when we got there and we found our where we'd been assigned seating for the Augusta Free Press. This is a family podcast, so I'm going to have to figure out how I can clean up this statement. But I looked at where we were sitting, which literally was second row half court.
Behind the TV people.
Behind the TV folks. When they did their pull out the monitor and Corey Alexander would work over a play and literally draw on it like the John Madden display back in the day, we're watching Corey work, and it's pretty impressive.
We could have touched a telestrator.
We could have played with the telestrator ourselves. We could have thrown popcorn down Corey's. It was nice. And I said to Chris, how do I phrase this? Whose male appendage did you have to slope to get these?
And my response was, I don't remember doing that, so I feel bad for the guy who did, and they gave me his pass instead. Yeah.
Yes, it was pretty impressive. Now that was day 1 and 2. I think we ended up. No, we did stay the whole time. We stayed
there the whole time. Yeah, I mean, last year was the first year, you know, in Barclays Center, and we'll be going back, I guess, you know, in a few weeks, actually 4 or 5 weeks, for the second year of the 2-year run in New York City. Barclays the first 3 days, because it's a 5-day event now. When I started covering these things, it was a 3-day event. Now it's a 5-day event with all the teams in the conference. Crystal, because Crystal, my wife Crystal, went with me last year, and we were sitting like club level for the first 3 days. You know, so Tuesday with the 3 play-in games, and then Wednesday with the not even quarterfinals, still first round games, second round games, and then the quarterfinal Thursday. We're sitting club level, which I'm not going to complain. We're in the arena. I mean, those tickets, if you bought tickets, they'd be expensive, and of course we're there as media. So for the Duke-Carolina game, which was the first semifinal, we were courtside, second row for Duke-Carolina in New York City. That was, of all the tournament games we've been to, I've seen Duke, Carolina, and New York City. That may never happen again. Literally, may never happen again.
We may never see Roy Williams and Coach K head-to-head anymore.
Oh, my gosh.
In a non-postseason tournament the way Carolina's playing.
And we knew that night that was a special game. And then I also knew that night watching those two teams play that I'd seen one team at least who was going to be in the national championship game. I actually thought it was Duke that night. But Carolina ends up winning the championship. So, yeah, those are some interesting experiences you get to have.
Good times. We'll do more behind the scenes with Chris Graham and the cool things that he gets to experience. And one of those cool things happened last night, a little teaser later on in the podcast, a story with Kyle Guy and formerly underneath the bowels of JPJ, so to speak. But let's talk about that game. We're recording this podcast on a Thursday. A lot of there's still naysayers out there. I love it with I think we're oddly with UVA the only number 2 team in the country that I can think of that can still play with a chip on the shoulder and say people don't respect us because now it's all about the offense. What if the offense ever shuts down? Well, Louisville scored at over 50% shooting from the field. Were draining threes like they're going out of style and couldn't keep up with UVA's offense. Speak a little bit about the I wouldn't even call it the offensive explosion, just the gameplay that you saw last night, and how comfortable and confident you feel after seeing Virginia offense be able to pace a very game Louisville team.
Yeah, Louisville played to its game plan, shot 50% from the field, literally 50% from the field, 60% in the second half. They were 9 of 10 over about a 7.5-minute stretch of the second half, 9 of 10 from the floor, and gained they were 9 of 10 from the floor, and then Ty Jerome hit a 3, and they're down 8 points. You go 9 of 10, and you're still down 8 points because Virginia's offense was so good. I pointed out in one of my post-game columns last night that Louisville scored 1.27 points per possession in the second half, and Virginia scored 1.36 points per possession in the second half. Louisville came in as according to KenPom.com, the 14th most efficient defense in the country, and Virginia shredded that defense. Now Louisville, they did their part to Virginia, but the talk about Virginia being boring. I wrote my headline for the game after the game recap was referencing it was a virtual track meet. It was 74-64, so fans are going to look at that score and say, track meet? What are you talking about? That's still a reasonable scoring game for a lot of teams. But there were only 61 possessions in that game last night. The two teams were very efficient. Louisville scoring 64 points. They're over a point per possession, which against Virginia, that they get the award for the year, I think, at this stage. So defensively, Virginia was nowhere near where they normally are. Louisville's a big team. They've got some size. They've got 3 guys they play who are 6'10" or bigger, who seem to have offensive skills. Ray Spalding, 8 of 10 from the floor.
Athletic.
He's an NBA player. I think the big kid Anas, 7'2", 7'3", offensively looks like he could maybe tweak his game a little bit, maybe eventually play in the NBA too. Offensively, defensively, he blocked some shots, but then he got abused by Kyle Guy a few times on switches. They were switching off so many screens that there were 3 different possessions I remember in the second half where Kyle Guy got switched on him. Kyle Guy's 6'2", 175. That kid's 7'2", and he's not much bigger than 175, but he's 7'2", long arms. And Kyle drove him to the basket one time, got a nice layup off the top of the window. Literally almost off the top of the window. Hit a 3 over him, also had a nice teardrop jumper over him. That Louisville team's a big team, but Virginia just was able to figure out last night how to run their offense. 9 of 16 from 3, 53.7% from the field, 57.7% in the second half. That's the sign of a good team. You look at last night's game. That game had all the makings of upset for that number 2 team. You come in off the big win against Duke. You've got, it seems like half the team has the flu. Going into the game, Devin Hall, Mamdi Diakite didn't practice on Monday with the flu. Light practices on Tuesday. You also have DeAndre Hunter, who sprained his ankle in the Duke game. He was a game-time decision last night. He plays, only has 6 points. Then half hour before tip-off, we get a notice on press row that Nigel Johnson is suspended for 3 games starting that night for an undisclosed violation of team rules. And so all of a sudden you've got at least 2 guys with the flu. You've got 1 guy with a gimpy ankle. You've got 1 guy in your rotation not available to play. And you're playing a good team in Louisville, second place in the ACC going into the game, and you outscore them. I mean, you didn't play your typical Virginia game. You had to outscore them. You had to out Louisville them in a sense. That's an impressive win because you didn't do it the normal way. It wasn't according to script. You rewrote the script and you still beat them by 10 points.
Let's talk about the Nigel situation. You guys get the warning 30 minutes on press row. We're just watching as fans from the stands and seeing him in street clothes and going, I wonder if the flu hit Nigel. I mean, we really had no idea. And I didn't even look for the street clothes until we see Marco sort of step onto the court. I was like, wow, we must really be hurting. So I didn't know about it till actually I saw you at press row afterwards.
After the game,
what happened to Nigel. The interesting, strong showing for a kid that hasn't had any significant minutes this year. Take us backwards because now I'm going back through my mental Rolodex going Marco Anthony. I don't even remember anything about him in the recruiting class.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Marco and how impressed were you with the first significant minutes that he's seen?
He had played double-digit minutes twice going into last night, and you're forgiven for not having remembered that because I didn't remember it. I had to go back to the stats and see it afterwards. It was the second game of the season, which was Austin Peay. He played 19 minutes. He played 16 minutes against Savannah State. So only the diehards would even – and I'm at every game, and I didn't remember that. He had played 6 minutes in ACC play, all garbage time minutes. And
one taking a shot that Bennett had to apologize at the end of the game for.
Thank you. Yeah, his 3 points. His 3 points in ACC play were apology-inducing, and so 3-star recruit out of high school, didn't become a 3-star recruit until he committed to UVA. Tony Bennett found him out of nowhere. I say nowhere. He was a good high school player in Texas, but again, he wasn't that heavily recruited by Power 5 schools. Didn't crack the ESPN top 250 until he committed to UVA, and then, the recruiting analysts say, well, Tony Bennett doesn't take, bad players. Maybe this guy needs a second look. 6'4", 228, stout young man, but yeah, we hadn't seen much of him. I mean, honestly, the Savannah State game would be a hard thing to judge on, and Austin Peay would be a hard thing to judge on. Didn't even have stellar offensive performances in those games. Didn't really stand out in the 35 minutes combined he played there. So, we on press row, I'll say that none of us knew. There was no inkling. I mean, sitting in the media room, I got there early last night, about 5 o'clock. There was no inkling that there was anything amiss with Nigel Johnson. Now, after the game, Tony Bennett tells reporters that the decision had been made Tuesday. We still have no idea. There's not even any speculation as to what it was, except that I'll say this. This is just reading tea leaves, so this is nothing official to say the least. But we've seen suspensions previously of players. I'm thinking Austin Nichols last year. When Nichols was suspended and the second time suspended especially, let go from the team due to what we still don't know officially, but we all presume was some violation regarding perhaps recreational drug use. He wasn't, he was let go, jettisoned, that was it, you're done, here's your walking papers. It doesn't feel to me that a 3-game suspension is a result of anything, well, certainly criminal. That would have come out by now. Somebody at the Progress or the Times-Dispatch would have dug up something, a DUI or something. Seems like just a violation of team rules, and I can't imagine that's anything more than perhaps missing a curfew. And Tony's going to lay the law down. And this is a good time to lay the law down. It's calendar just turned to February 1st today.
And you have a 3-game lead in the ACC.
And now you have a 3-game lead in the ACC, yeah, and you've beaten those 3 second-place teams. So the closest competitors, if they're even close, you've already beaten them all. So yeah, it's a good time to lay the law down. And Tony lays the law down. He laid the law down last year, and only won 23 games because he got rid of Nichols. He's basically saying nobody's above the team, and so yeah. But he told the team Tuesday. So Anthony, who had not played except for garbage time minutes, 2 games where he played, again, in the rotation, if you want to say, the 16 minutes and 19 minutes in those 2 games, Austin Peay and the Savannah State games. The rest of his time were garbage minutes and had a lot of DNP coaches' decisions on his ledger. He goes from that to, hey, it's Tuesday. Guess what, Marco? You're going to play tomorrow. You're going to be the first guard off the bench tomorrow against Louisville, by the way, the 14th best defensive team in the country, second place in the ACC. And so you'd be forgiven for, one, not knowing Marco Anthony, not having remembered that he was even on the roster, thinking that at best he was being redshirted, and then also then not expecting anything of him. So, of course, he gets in the game, minute into the game, he hits an open jump shot. Whoa, Anthony does something, and then 2 minutes later, it's a 3. He had another 3 in the second half, and then that hard drive to the basket at a time that was rather meaningful. Virginia led by 9, but Louisville was cutting into the lead. It was in the midst of that stretch of 9 shots out of 10 that they made, and he had a end of shot clock. Down, I think it was 4 or 5 seconds left on the shot clock. Grabs the ball, runs in the lane. I thought he got fouled, but he made that shot at the rim. Against intense pressure. I thought there was contact there that could have been called. And so he plays 18 minutes, and so he scores the 10 points. We're all looking at the 10 points, 4 of 6 shooting, 2 of 3 from 3. But you don't play 18 minutes for Tony Bennett unless you play defense too. Jay Huff's the example there. Jay Huff can play offense with the best of anybody in the country from the post perspective, but he's not on the floor because he doesn't play defense. So for Anthony to get those 18 minutes means Tony thought he was playing good D in the backcourt. And so, I can't say much else than now, he's proven it to us in one game against a pretty tough opponent that he's worthy of more minutes in the future.
Hard to gaze in the crystal ball. They've got Syracuse, and then who else?
Florida State next week on the
Florida
road.
State, another long team. Both
of whom lost last night.
Yeah, it was a crazy when I looked at our top 15 that we built on for the Monday podcast. I was like, wow, some of those kids, some of those teams dropped, and good for Virginia Tech, looking like they want to be a bubble team
after
or
a near
better.
implosion in the final minute.
Yeah, it was close. It was fun to watch. After the games against Syracuse and Florida State, if Marco continues to play with confidence, isn't a defensive liability, and it's a freshman you want to groom, obviously, and Nigel being the transfer, the senior, what happens? Hard to gaze in the crystal ball on this, but does Nigel lose some minutes and time if Marco keeps playing the way he's playing?
Possible. I think Tony wants to go 8-man rotation. I think the best teams do shorten the bench to have an 8-man rotation. Louisville last night they played 10 guys, and I think it can be hard to get continuity if you play too many guys. And Tony's had that issue in the past. Last year he went with a 9 or 10-man rotation most games, and it was because he couldn't get the right production out of the 5 guys he had on the floor, so he had to try different things. I think what you see out of this is I don't know that anybody loses minutes or gains minutes necessarily, but I was saying this to Scott German, our partner in crime on a lot of these podcasts on our drive back from the game last night. It could be the case where, okay, if nothing else, maybe Johnson gets his minutes back when he comes back after the suspension's over, and Anthony kind of recedes back into the recesses, back onto the bench for a while. But if necessary, if say Ty Jerome or Kyle Guy or Devin Hall gets a couple quick fouls in the game, Anthony can. We can trust Anthony now. Not that he can come in and play because he could. You can always pull the lever there, push the lever there. But now you can trust that. Hey, that kid, we can trust him to go out and if he has to play some minutes as a stopgap, we can trust that. Or from a matchup standpoint, he and Johnson are so different. 6'4", 228. He's a stout guard. He can get in the lane. He's strong enough to finish, as we saw last night. Johnson, 6'2", quick guy. One of the quicker guys I've seen, certainly the Tony Bennett era, maybe in the last 20 years, playing point guard for Virginia. Him and Jontel Evans kind of go in that realm. Jontel was at the game last night. So they're different players. They don't. And Johnson's more. He's strictly a point guard, whereas Anthony can bring the ball up the court, but he's better running off those screens. So. Gives you flexibility. I think it's a good thing that we now have discovered one game, one performance against a really top-flight opponent that, now we can go 9 deep if we need to. So I think it's actually a good thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing for Nigel Johnson, but, there are 2 road games coming up where Anthony can really prove himself to be even more valuable.
We're in the arena when the game is going on. Dickie Vitale covering the game. I found it fascinating going back and watching some archive footage. I think if you created the Dickie Vitale drinking game and had to drink every time he said diaper dandy, that you'd be slightly intoxicated. He was gushing, as he's known to do, over our two sophomores in Guy and Jerome. And what a fascinating game for Vitale, and who knows if the rest of the country was watching that game and how they interpret what they saw. Guy had quite the arsenal. You referenced early on him attacking Mahmoud, the 7-footer with no fear. We had some odd, a lot of points in the paint. At one point, he had 2 or 3 guys around him. He does a little pivot and throws up a little hook. He throws that high arcing one-handed, Guy seems to have really established himself as an elite national scorer and could put up more points in a different system but satisfy the role he's playing. And you actually had an interesting run in you and Scott. Describe a little bit your post-game conversation, post-locker room and shower when running into Guy in the basement.
Well, Scott and I have been Kyle Guy fans since last season, just the potential. Scott always says, Kyle was Mr. Basketball in Indiana. They don't give that award to stiffs. Indiana's arguably the best state for high school basketball in the country. If you're Mr. Basketball there, you're a pretty good player. He's McDonald's All-American as well. And so last year, we saw out of Kyle. We saw potential. He had 20 points, like in the ACC tournament as an example. He had 20 points in that opener against Pitt, and then he went scoreless against Notre Dame. That was what you got from one game to the next. He only played 2 minutes, I think, against Miami in that overtime loss, that depressing overtime loss in February, the night we honored Malcolm Brogdon with his jersey being retired. And then he would go off in some games. The issue last year was, he had 2 issues. One, he was so 3 dependent. And if his 3-point game wasn't on, he really, he didn't have a dribble drive game. He wasn't going to go into the lane. So teams knew, okay, well, he's only a threat 20 feet and out. And also he couldn't play enough defense to stay on the floor. So, one thing I wrote about actually going into the season was, for Kyle Guy to up his game between now and his senior season, he needs to add dribble drives. He needs to be able to get to the rim sometimes. He needs to be able to hit those mid-range jumpers, and he needs to play some defense. Okay, so what has he done? If you look at basketballreference.com, the ACC leaders section of that, it's a fascinating site, and I'll show Jeff afterwards just to get you acclimated to how wondrous this site is in terms of the wealth of information. It's like sabermetrics for basketball. And so the defensive rating stat is one that I look at a lot because being a Virginia basketball writer, lists the top 20 individual players by defensive rating in the conference. And actually you can also do it by the country as well. Isaiah Wilkins, number 1 in the country, number 1 in the ACC. Of the top 7 players in the ACC in defensive rating, 5 are Virginia starters, which means Kyle Guy's in that list. Now, he's the 5th of the 5, but last year, just for comparison's sake, and a lot of factors go into this, is points per possession when you're the primary defender. Last year, his number was like .98 per 0.98 per possession, 98 points per 100 possessions, and this year it's down to .875. And so he's improved, more than a tenth of a point per possession in terms of his defensive rating, and which puts him within a tenth of a point of Isaiah Wilkins, which tells you how good Isaiah Wilkins is. He's the number 1 rated defender with a .785 rating. I think Ty Jerome is number 2 at .861. Wilkins is head and shoulders above the country in this respect. But Guy is on the floor because he's playing elite defense. And last night's game, as an example, shot 21 shots from the floor. Only 6 of them were three-point attempts. Now, he made 3 of them. But, that run of layups, the teardrops, the mid-range jumpers, he's diversified his game to a point. And I thought it might take him a couple years to do this. He did this basically from last March until November. And so we talked to him after the game. Scott and I did, to just basically, he's there. You're interviewing guys, and ask him what did you do? You've transformed. You did what it takes most guys a career to do, and you've done it in one off season. How did you do that? I just worked hard. And he said, the thing is, I came to Virginia he as McDonald's All-American shooting guard, he's got the skills, he's got the stats. He could go anywhere he wanted to and put up 25 points a game. I mean, you can see that already. If he played in a system like Trae Young plays in, he could score some points. But he came to Virginia to learn how to play defense and learn how to play team basketball. And he said, I came here for a reason, and, off season, working with Coach Curtis, Mike Curtis, the strength and conditioning coach, former UVA player. He's gotten a lot stronger. He's put on 15 pounds. He looks like he's still skinny. He's 6'2", 175, but he's not nearly as skinny as he was last year. And he's just worked on his game. And so Scott then says, I'd be interested to see what you could do if you took the blinders off. And he said, and Kyle responded to the effect, I wish I could remember exactly how he put it, but to the effect of, I think I could put up Trae Young numbers here if you gave me the chance. He said, I think I could put up 40 here. And so, I'd love to go back to Tony with that and see what Tony thinks about that. But, you could see it. I mean, you could see the potential there. He put up 21 shots last night, and he had an array. So, he's a confident young man, but he had a big smile on his face when he was talking. So he wasn't cocky. It was a quiet confidence from a man who's worked really hard to get where he is.
The Richard Morgan conscience.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So speaking of confidence, you got Kyle being sort of the shooter and the scorer on this team, and it looks like as roles continue to develop and adapt throughout the course of the season, Jerome has become the silent assassin, the closer. If you will.
Yeah.
I mean, him, as to steal from the Washington Wizards color guy, Dagger, what he did.
He had two of them last night.
Yes. I mean, it just, and an unbelievable crossover, and both of them with no time left on the shot clock, when you know that he's going to have to chuck it, and you still can't stop it, and he still gets a shot in rhythm, in motion, and a good look at the basket. Pretty crazy, Do we get to the point now where you see Kyle Guy take the majority of the shots, but Jerome get more of them in the last 2 minutes?
Well, he's got the ice wet in his veins. Actually, we were talking with Kyle about Ty as well. And Kyle said that when Ty's in a rhythm from three-point range, he doesn't even care how far he is out. He doesn't. He said for Kyle, I mean, if you pay attention, Kyle's usually right at the three-point line when he shoots his threes. He's not someone who shoots it from 25 feet. And so we asked, what is it with Ty? He seems to be better from 25 feet and out. And he said, when that guy's in his rhythm, he doesn't even look at the floor. He just shoots it. And, it's his shot is so different. His game is so different. Kyle, when he breaks a guy down and gets to the basket, it's with the quick dribbles. You saw that with, the times he took Mahmoud to the rim last night. Quick dribbles, cross a guy over, get to the basket, and lay it up there. Jerome he's 6'5". He seems to have a wingspan that's maybe more 6'7" or 6'8". I've never seen it, officially listed or anything like that. But he plays bigger than 6'5". He plays stronger than a 6'5", 19-year-old as well. When he gets in the lane, he can finish. We saw a couple of those drives to the lane last night. He just seems to, he can finish the hard shots, but then his best shooting from the perimeter, whereas Guy, he's running off a screen and he's falling down. He seems off balance, and that's when he's at his best. I mean, when Kyle's standing there wide open, it's almost like he wants somebody to run at him before he can make a shot. Whereas Jerome, it's almost a set shot. I mean, he kind of lifts off the floor a little bit, but it's almost like the principles of a set shot. But he's so balanced that, I can see him having unlimited range with that shot because – And he unlike some guys too, he's not fazed by a hand in his face or some guy running at him trying to, maybe undercut him or anything else. He's so focused. We saw that with the replay that if you've looked at Twitter, you've seen it 1,000 times now. The fake of the Duke defender in the zone to get him off of him, and then shooting that three from about 5 feet behind the line. His balance on those shots is just tremendous, and his the fact that he's made a bunch of these shots now in the last couple minutes of games against Duke and Louisville and teams like that, that guy's got to be he's got ice water in his veins. I mean, it's a cliche, but man, that kid, he had 2 points at halftime last night, finished with 16 and 9 assists. He is a second half guy. He's the sabermetrician people don't believe in clutch, but that kid's clutch.
Yeah, from his freshman exposure to Villanova when he had his kind of coming out party and showed us some balls of steel during some tough moments. seems to have transferred over into this, and it's kind of nice to think these are two sophomores that probably will see some NBA action potentially, or some overseas, or who knows. But
you said something about NBA there. Remember, I wrote a column. I'm sorry to interject there, but we had some fun last night. I got there early. So our friend Corey in the media room stirred up some interesting discussion a couple weeks ago, talking about how this was Tony's best job because it's his least talented team. You look at those past teams that have Malcolm Brogdon, Justin Anderson, Joe Harris, Mike Scott, all those NBA guys, Leonard Parentis, NBA guys, and this team doesn't have anybody who's an NBA player on it. Maybe DeAndre Hunter. So last night we saw Kevin McGreevy, the former Washington Bullets coach, great NBA player in his own right. He's a scout now, it's like the 7th or 8th time we've seen him at a game this year. So, you see a guy once or twice, because you'll see Matt Doherty at games. He scouts for some NBA teams. You see a guy once or twice in a season, you think the reason they're there is to scout the other team, and that's why they're there. You see a guy several times in a season, you're starting to think, maybe he's here for CR guys. And so Scott actually went up and asked, so who are you here to see? Well, I'm not going to really tell you who I'm here to see, but there's a few UVA guys we're looking at. Well, how many UVA guys do you think have NBA potential? 5, maybe 6? So, no talent, Corey. No talent. There's a lot of talent there. Tony's doing a good job with it, but some of us have been saying for a while this team was as talented, and I think the most talented team that Tony's ever had. And at least one NBA scout who watches them regularly from the seats at JPJ agrees with us.
So on the will the ACC media agree with us? How many first-team ACC players does Virginia get and put on that roster?
It's and
is it just going to be Duke and Virginia kids?
I look at the first rendering that I see that's the easiest one to get to is the KenPom.com, and it's all efficiency stat based. So that's one that winnows out just what you see with your eyes and what you see in stats. And honestly, I voted these things too. A lot of people just vote based on stats. So let's ferret that out. That's what hurts Virginia because they don't have the offensive stats necessarily. Kyle Guy leads the team in scoring 15 points a game. Devin Hall scores 13 a game. That said, we've had Malcolm Brogdon. Malcolm Brogdon was a 3-time first-team All-ACC guy. He played in the system. Joe Harris was a first-team All-ACC guy. He played in the system. So Virginia guys have overcome that bias against the stats. You're not going to see a Virginia guy score 20 points a game. That's just not going to happen. That said, the KenPom.com has 2 Duke guys, 2 Virginia guys, 1 UNC guy. The 2 Duke guys being Gary Trent Jr. and obviously Marvin Bagley, number 1. Joel Berry being the UNC guy, and then Kyle Guy and Devin Hall being the 2 UVA representatives. If I had to bet, I would not be surprised if Devin Hall were to slip to the second team. He'd be the first vote getter on the second team, the highest vote getter on the second team. But, it wouldn't surprise me either. His numbers, he averages 13 point something per game. He's leading the ACC in three-point shooting. His defense is stellar. And then Guy is the one who gets the buzz because he's he has the flash, he's scoring and everything else.
The man bun.
He didn't ask him last night what happened to the man bun, but you don't want to even ask the question now because the man bun's gone and look what he's doing. So
no kidding. Maybe
the man bun was weighing him down last year, So he's got a little bit extra hops now because the man bun's gone.
More aerodynamic.
Yeah. I would love to throw in Isaiah Wilkins. His stat profile will not get him on the first team. But if you voted strictly on box plus minus, the aggregate plus minus over a season, he's number 1 in the ACC in box plus minus, which is essentially the score of your games of your team's games when you're on the floor. Virginia is at its best when Isaiah Wilkins is on the floor over the course of the season. Now, of course, Virginia's 10-0, winning games by an average of 11.6 points a game. Virginia should have a guy leading in that statistic, but I would love Isaiah Wilkins. He's probably he's a second team guy. Ty Jerome's probably a second team guy. I mean, outside of Jack Solid and DeAndre Hunter's probably all freshman team, and Isaiah Wilkins is your defensive player of the year, and it's going to be interesting to see this now. This will not happen because but I mentioned that 5 of the top 7 guys defensive rating in the ACC are Virginia starters. How many guys did we get on the All-ACC defensive team? And does Kyle Guy get on that list? After last year, he sat on the bench for so long. He only played 2 minutes against Miami, and he might be an All-ACC defensive guy this year. So, yeah, those categories will be interesting ones to see.
Health did Tony talk about it? Did you get to talk about the kids at all? Isaiah and Dre and how they're reacting. You had a bad back. You had the twisted ankle. You've got some flu-like symptoms. After last night, what were you hearing?
Well, this is where, so if you go to the press conferences, they don't say anything. But if you have a guy like Scott German who was doing his best Jeff Fife impersonation, or maybe you were doing a Scott German impersonation when you were snooping around the ACC tournament a few years ago for us, Scott hung around last night and watched the game from the tunnel for the most part last night. And hanging around the tunnel, you hear things that you don't hear when you're in the bubble of the media cauldron. And there's actually not great news regarding Isaiah Wilkins. He's going to play, and he played last night. 10 rebounds, didn't score. He's had a couple of subpar offensive games, which, his offense is a bonus always. But, his ability to hit that 12-foot jumper, especially coming up Saturday in the zone against Syracuse, is key. And he didn't hit that shot against Duke, and I think that's one reason he didn't get a lot of time in the second half of that game. But apparently, if you remember, I think it was the NC State game. It was a Clemson game. He went out early in the second half, fell on his butt, had a bruised butt bone, didn't play the rest of the game. Apparently, that issue is something that the doctors fear, unofficially, just scuttlebutt hearing from Scott being in the tunnel, that they could linger. It's the kind of thing, kind of like if you're an athlete or if you're a runner or you lift weights at a gym and you have a nagging whatever, you have shoulder or knee or something like that. If you rest a week or two that it'll go away, but you don't want to rest a week or two. People who play pickup basketball, Jeff Fife, who get hurt and then still go play every Monday and Friday, right? So
Monday, Wednesday, Friday now.
Every Monday, Wednesday,
My
Friday.
right knee is killing me.
And if you sit out a week or two that it'll be better, but you don't because you want to keep playing. Well, that's kind of where Isaiah is with this tailbone issue. So he'll be, likely 80, 85, 90% the rest of the way. But as far as the flu, if the guys got through last night, and Hall especially was one that, he and Diakite didn't practice on Monday. I understand that Hall only lightly practiced on Tuesday. But I was there, like I said last night, about 5 o'clock before the game, and I sat out courtside because I wanted to see who was warming up, who was in street clothes, who wasn't. And Hall was the first one out there about 5:15, and he worked with three guys, three members of the student manager staff, about a half hour shooting jump shots. He got a good sweat up, so I could tell he was ready to play. And he played 38 minutes last night. So if they got through last night, my feeling is, whatever lingering symptoms there would be are going to be gone by Saturday.
Let's speak briefly on Saturday. You'll do a podcast sort of breaking down Syracuse. We've broken them down once already on the way they run that zone. I would say, I don't think Virginia goes undefeated in the ACC. I've always thought this game in New York would be the one that trips us up. And I hope it's not Virginia Tech at home on my birthday. If this one seems like, but every time you speak, you're like, all right, this can be the trap game.
Every game's a trap game.
Every game's a trap game. Without getting into the full breakdown, which you'll do later on this week with a podcast, it's hard to lose any type of momentum or confidence in what Virginia's going to do, and the road doesn't seem to affect them very much. What do you expect to see out of the Hoos at Syracuse on Saturday late afternoon?
Well, I'm worried about Wilkins. That the way they play that 2-3 zone. I'm repeating myself a bit here. We've played a couple of these teams recently, Duke being one. The soft spot is that middle, and Wilkins. If Wilkins doesn't hit that shot, you're going to have to put Hunter in early, because Hunter can hit that shot and also drive to the basket. In fact, Hunter was a key reason Virginia won that first game. Syracuse comes in wounded, too. They lost last night, a surprise loss on the road at Georgia Tech, and suddenly, they had come in on a 3 or 4 game winning streak. Now they're back under 500 in ACC play. We broke down our ACC NCAA tournament hope with a podcast and a column earlier this week. I don't know that anybody right now from North Carolina on down, if Carolina's 5-5 in the ACC right now, even Miami at 5-4 with Bruce Brown being out, I don't think anybody from outside of Virginia at 10-0, and then Duke and Clemson at 7-3, Louisville at 6-3. That's the top four. I don't think anybody from 5 to 13, certainly the teams at the bottom of that part, feels like they've got anything sewn up. So Syracuse loses to Georgia Tech. They're a wounded team. They got to come home and they got to win that game. So you're going to get the best shot from Syracuse just from a game theory perspective. And then they played. They have to have some confidence that they were down 12, minute and a half to go, made it a 3-point game in the last minute with their press. They're not going to change, though, and go press early, even though you would think that would logically make the case because they only play 5 guys. So they're limited in terms of numbers of guys that Boeheim uses. There's maybe a 6th guy who will play 5 or 10 minutes. So depth's an issue for them. But, when you go to Syracuse, an issue is depth perception. You're playing in a football stadium, so the sight lines are different. So you got to get used to shooting, instead of like at JPJ, the court's right, the stands are right on top of the court. The stands are further out, so it affects your sight differently. Also, the talk last night at the game was, in the tunnels. I'll use that term from now on when we talk about what's being said behind the scenes in a tunnel there at JPJ. Was that Syracuse is expecting a huge crowd for this game. In fact, they're apparently opening up extra seating for this game. They're expecting 37,000 plus for this game. It's going to be the big game of the year on campus there at Syracuse. So you're going to have a crowd that's ready to get the upset. A program that still remembers the upset a couple years ago in the Elite Eight, that maybe has some confidence even in a defeat at Virginia, and they need the win. So there's a few factors. I mean, this, of course, I'm the guy finding the clouds in every silver lining as far as this goes because trying to do that. But there are quite a few reasons that Syracuse can win this game certainly.
It'd be curious, and for all of that coverage and to stay close, I know you'll, even though from afar, you guys will open up a blog and get chatting on that. And for your pregame coverage on a little bit on the breakdown, look for the columns, for the podcast, for the postgame coverage, everything you need with UVA Sports is on Augusta Free Press. So you guys have a fantastic week. We'll see how the Who's handle a toxic, loud, entertaining environment in New York. For Chris Graham, I am Jeff Fife. Have a great week.